She lived in the shadow of one of the most famous women on earth, yet quietly built a life far stranger, freer, and more mysterious than most people ever realized. Lee Radziwill moved through royalty, rock stars, and relics of history, from traveling with Mick Jagger in the 1970s to guarding a wartime artifact few even knew existed. When she died at 85, the biggest surprise wasn't her past. It was her will. Tonight, we uncover why an ex-princess with a legendary life chose to leave her entire fortune to just one person. Caroline Lee Bouvier was born in 1933 at Doctors Hospital in New York City. Her father, John Vernew Blackjack Bouvier III, was a prominent Wall Street figure, and her mother, Janet Norton Lee, was a well-known socialite. Almost from birth, she was called Lee, rather than by her given name, a nickname that stayed with her for the rest of her life. She grew up alongside her older sister, Jacqueline Kennedy, years before Jacqueline would become one of the most famous women in the world. The sisters were raised in privilege, living on Park Avenue and spending summers in the Hamptons, far from the noise and pressure of Manhattan. Lee's education reflected her family's status. Although she moved between several elite schools, her academic path remained steady. She attended the Chapin School in New York City, the Potomac School in Washington, D.C., and Miss Porter's School in Farmington, Connecticut. Eventually, she enrolled at Sarah Lawrence College. During her sophomore year, she made a defining choice, leaving the United States to study art in Italy, a decision that reflected her early desire to step outside expectations and carve out an identity of her own. Behind the polished surface, however, her family life was fractured. Her father's struggles with alcoholism and extramarital affairs led to her parents' separation while Lee was still young. Despite the scandal, the Bouvier remained part of New York's social elite, wielding influence and connections that few families could rival. Lee and Jacqueline stayed with their mother, who later married Hugh Auchincloss, a wealthy man who welcomed them into his Virginia estate. Through this marriage, the sisters gained additional half-siblings and step-siblings, further reshaping their family dynamic. From an early age, Lee felt overshadowed by Jacqueline. Their father openly favored Jacqueline, who was older, academically stronger, and already commanding attention wherever she went. Lee quietly absorbed the comparison, sometimes with resentment, sometimes with envy. Jacqueline's natural ease in the spotlight only deepened Lee's sense that she was living in her sister's shadow, a feeling that would follow her into adulthood. By the time Lee formally entered high society, she was already a familiar face. Her debut was celebrated with a full-page photograph in Life magazine's December 25, 1950 issue, an unmistakable sign of her standing in elite circles. Yet even as she moved effortlessly through that world, her personal life would repeatedly complicate her professional ambitions. Lee Radziwill approached marriage with a firm personal rule: 3 chances, no more. When she married for the first time, she was just 21 years old. On April 18, 1953, she wed Michael Temple Canfield, a publishing executive who seemed to offer everything she longed for at that stage of her life. Her biological father walked her down the aisle, fulfilling a romantic vision she had carried for years. More than love, Lee wanted independence. She was eager to escape her mother's control, and Michael represented freedom: handsome, intelligent, well-connected, and wealthy. After the wedding, the couple settled into an elegant home on Chester Square in London. The early months felt almost unreal. Michael was attentive and affectionate, and Lee believed she was living inside the fairy tale she had imagined. But cracks soon appeared. Michael was a heavy drinker, a problem that worsened despite his prestigious role at Harper & Brothers and his reputation as a gifted editor. One night he collapsed in his room, so incapacitated that Lee couldn't even enter through the front door. Though the incident briefly jolted him into trying to change, his attempts at sobriety never lasted. As her marriage unraveled, Lee met Prince Stanisław Albrecht Radziwill, a Polish-Lithuanian aristocrat, and fell deeply in love. This was the same period when her sister Jacqueline married John F. Kennedy, becoming Jacqueline Kennedy. With their influence, the Kennedys helped Lee secure an annulment of her first marriage through the Vatican. On March 19, 1959, Lee married Prince Radziwill and officially became a princess. The irony was not lost on society observers. Rumors persisted that Michael Canfield himself may have been the biological son of Prince George, Duke of Kent, which, if true, would have made him royal by birth. Lee and Prince Radziwill had 2 children, Anthony and Christina, and lived near Buckingham Palace, firmly embedded in European high society. Yet despite the glamour, the marriage eventually deteriorated. Accounts differed on the cause. Some cited the prince's repeated affairs. Others pointed to Lee's growing closeness to Aristotle Onassis, who would later marry Jacqueline. Their divorce in 1974 was ultimately linked to multiple strains, including Lee's alleged relationship with photographer Peter Beard. In later years, Lee reflected on her life with striking honesty. She admitted to other romances and infatuations, but none compared to what she felt with Radziwill. "There were other loves," she once said, "but never the joy or understanding of life and living that I experienced with Stas." In 1988, Lee Radziwill made one last leap of faith in love. She married film director Herbert Ross, stepping away from the world of nobility and monarchy for what felt like a final attempt at lasting companionship. Ross was a major Hollywood figure, known for directing hits such as Steel Magnolias, Play It Again, Sam, and The Goodbye Girl. After a private wedding at Lee's Fifth Avenue apartment, guests gathered at Jacqueline Kennedy's New York home for an intimate luncheon celebrating the couple. The marriage, however, did not endure. In 2001, Lee and Ross divorced. Looking back, Lee admitted that Ross was unlike any man she had been involved with before, but she also became increasingly candid about her discomfort with Hollywood. She spoke openly about her dislike of its insular culture and acknowledged that the film industry had never been as glamorous or fulfilling as she once imagined. Through all the changes in her personal life, Lee's deepest and most enduring bond remained with her sister. Although Lee often felt overshadowed by Jacqueline in childhood, their relationship grew remarkably close in adulthood, especially during Jacqueline's years as First Lady. They spent holidays together, traveled extensively, attended state functions, entertained friends at the Kennedys' London townhouse, and famously took a month-long trip through Pakistan, India, and Italy in 1962. That closeness was reflected even in family details. Jacqueline named her daughter Caroline in honor of Lee's given name, Caroline, reinforcing their lifelong connection. Lee's own daughter also received President Kennedy's blessing during his lifetime. Everything changed after the assassination in 1963. When the news reached Lee in London, she immediately flew to Washington, D.C. to be at her sister's side. As the nation watched in grief, Lee became a quiet pillar of strength, supporting Jacqueline through the procession, the lying in state, and the funeral at the Cathedral of St. Matthew the Apostle. As the flag-draped Air Force One stood in silent tribute during the burial at Arlington National Cemetery, even Lee Radziwill could no longer contain her emotions. She broke down openly, later remembered as the only one who did. In the days that followed, it emerged how deeply she admired her sister's strength. Lee often left handwritten notes on Jacqueline Kennedy's pillow. Small, private gestures meant to remind her she wasn't alone. When Jacqueline and her children left the White House for the Georgetown home of Ambassador W. Averill Harriman, Lee stayed close, helping her sister endure what would become the longest, hardest day of her life. Soon after, Lee also helped Jacqueline relocate to New York, settling not far from the Fifth Avenue apartment Lee herself had just purchased. For a time, the sisters remained inseparable, bound by grief and mutual dependence. But heartbreak has a way of changing even the closest relationships. Despite persistent rumors linking Lee to Aristotle Onassis, the media never confirmed a romantic involvement. What was undeniable was that Onassis had long been part of their rarefied social world, hosted at London dinner parties and welcomed aboard his yacht, Christina. In August 1963, after Jacqueline's premature son Patrick died just a day after birth, Lee reached out with an offer from Onassis, a chance to rest and grieve aboard the Christina. Jacqueline accepted. That decision quietly shifted the balance between the sisters. As Jacqueline traveled with the Radzywills across the Mediterranean, she sought solitude to mourn. Yet she did so in Lee's orbit. Later accounts would suggest the voyage altered more than anyone expected. An intimate biography of Lee, published in 1995, examined the journey closely, arguing that Jacqueline's relationship with Onassis deepened during that time. Friends of Lee insisted her sister's presence aboard the yacht had been entirely selfless, but contemporaneous coverage suggested otherwise. The book concluded that Jacqueline's growing closeness with Onassis drove a wedge between the sisters, one widened further by another, parallel bond forming back home. In the months after the assassination, Robert F. Kennedy reportedly provided Jacqueline with profound emotional support. Their frequent, intense conversations sparked speculation that their relationship was unusually close, though no proof ever emerged. Still, the whispers added strain to an already fragile family dynamic. The breaking point came years later. When Lee learned of Robert Kennedy's assassination in London in June 1968, the shock overwhelmed her. Distraught, she lost control of her car and crashed into another vehicle. Even more unsettling was Jacqueline's growing conviction that America had descended into uncontrollable violence and that anyone bearing the Kennedy name was a target. To her, staying no longer felt safe. Leaving seemed like the only choice. And so she did. Ironically, it was Aristotle Onassis who ultimately gave Jacqueline the means to leave. After they began dating, she was promised financial security through a multi-million-dollar prenuptial agreement. 5 years after President Kennedy's assassination, Jacqueline married Onassis in a tabloid-splashed ceremony on his private island, Scorpios, an event Lee attended in silence. In the aftermath, Lee firmly denied ever having had an affair with Onassis. She dismissed the rumors with laughter and told reporters she had no regrets about the strained relationship with her sister Jacqueline Kennedy. Still, the distance between them was unmistakable. Privately, Lee felt a familiar sting, convinced that Onassis had been hers until Jacqueline stepped in, echoing a childhood pattern she believed she'd lived with all her life. The fracture deepened at home. Lee's daughter, Christina, struggled quietly with severe body image issues, intensified by constant comparison to her famously slim aunt. Though Lee loved her children deeply, she missed the warning signs. Christina found comfort with Jacqueline, and one day moved out without explanation to live nearby with her aunt, an act that devastated Lee and widened the rift between the sisters. As the 1960s progressed, Lee's world shifted. She surrounded herself with creative figures like Truman Capote, Cecil Beaton, Rudolf Nureyev, and Margot Fonteyn. She became one of Capote's celebrated swans, finding kinship with someone who understood what it meant to feel perpetually overshadowed. After Jacqueline's 1968 marriage to Onassis, Lee reportedly turned to Capote in tears, struggling to comprehend her sister's detachment. Determined to help Lee step out of that shadow, Capote encouraged her to pursue acting seriously. She trained at London's Royal Academy of Dramatic Art and the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, and soon took on the role of the free-spirited socialite Tracy Lord in the Philadelphia Story. Because she was Jacqueline Kennedy's sister, The public and press followed Lee Radziwill's every move, especially when she attempted to reinvent herself as an actress. Her stage debut drew enormous attention, but the reviews were brutal. Some critics dismissed her outright, with the Chicago Tribune famously writing, "A new star is not born." While a few acknowledged her poise, most found her performance stiff and amateurish. Still, Lee refused to quit. Encouraged by Truman Capote, producer David Susskind cast her in a television remake of Otto Preminger's Laura, which aired on ABC in January 1968. Capote co-wrote the adaptation, hoping it would be Lee's breakthrough. It wasn't. Critics remained unconvinced. The New York Times described her as a beautiful presence with limited dramatic range. Accepting that acting stardom was unlikely, Lee returned to London. Around the same time, her friendship with Capote unraveled. When Gore Vidal sued Capote for libel, Lee refused to testify, forcing Capote to apologize and straining their bond. Worse still, Capote later revealed private confidences Lee had shared about her family in unpublished and partially leaked writings. The betrayal cost him his place in elite social circles and ended their friendship for good. Away from acting, Lee found real success in a quieter field: interior design. While living at Turville Grange with her second husband, she worked closely with Italian designer Renzo Mongiardino, developing a refined, theatrical aesthetic. Her work drew admiration from photographers like Cecil Beaton, and in 1976, she launched her own design firm. Positive press, including a feature in Architectural Digest, brought her wealthy private clients and a new sense of purpose. Lee's reputation as a style icon never faded. In 1996, she was inducted into Vanity Fair's International Best Dressed Hall of Fame. Her homes in Manhattan and Paris were widely admired and later featured in Elle Decor. In 2013, The Guardian named her one of the most fashionable people over 50, while designers like Giorgio Armani cited her as a lasting influence. Despite her glamorous image, Lee did not inherit the vast fortune her sister did and struggled at times to maintain her lifestyle. Still, when she died peacefully at her New York home in February 2019 at age 85, it emerged that her estate was worth more than $50 million. Her funeral at St. Thomas More drew leading figures from fashion, art, and culture. In her final will, Lee left her fortune to a single person: her daughter, Anna Christina Tina Radziwill. In a final, unexpected gesture, the woman who spent a lifetime in her sister's shadow ensured that, in death, the spotlight finally fell on her own legacy.